Good morning everyone. So in the previous classes we have already gone through a system called as luminescence. We have already seen fluorescence and phosphorescence and how they might occur. In the present session we will be looking for the definition of luminescence, fluorescence and phosphorescence once again. We would try to explain how a luminescence happens. We would try to distinguish between absorption, excitation and emission spectra. Let us see a brief history of fluorescence. What exactly is a fluorescence? It's a type of light emission. It was first observed from quinine by Sir J.F.W. Herschel in 1845. What he did was he took a blue glass filter through a church window. That is, he shined a light which is less than 400 nanometer through this light through a system of quinine solution, and he kept an absorbance in a way that yellow glass of wine acted as a filter which was greater than 400 nanometer. So earlier when he shined a light, he could see that it was less than 400 nanometer, but further when he got back the emission spectrum, he saw that it was greater than 400 nanometer. So 1853 J.G. Stokes coined the term fluorescence. When this was observed, that means the system where previously a shorter wavelength was given to the solution, whereas when we got out the emission spectra there was a longer wavelength. That means the energy was high and later in the emission spectra the energy was less. What is a molecular luminescence? This comes with the categories of chemiluminescence, phosphorescence and molecular fluorescence. Chemiluminescence is nothing but excitation resulting from a chemical reaction. It can be an example of luciferin. When there is an excitation by the absorption of photons, then it is called as photoluminescence. There are certain principles which are associated with the photoluminescence. The molecules are first excited in the ground state of the outer shell electrons, like in absorbance phenomena. That is the absorbance phenomena like UV, you can see IR spectra, so on and so forth. But will these electrons stay at an excited state? No, they would want to return back to the ground state. In this phenomena, what will happen is the excited species give an emission spectrum which provides an information for quantification and qualification of a certain molecule. Many of the molecules may not be very strongly giving fluorescence or phosphorescence, but at least they give the data related to fluorescence spectroscopy. Fluorescence is short-lived. We have already seen that fluorescence has got a time lapse of less than 10 raised to minus 5 seconds, whereas phosphorescence features from the luminescence from 10 raised to minus 4 to almost 20 seconds. We have already seen this in our previous classes. Why exactly do we use molecular luminescence? This technique is really interesting because there is a sensitivity. That is, we can take up a range of parts per billion. This order of magnitude, we can say that the absorption spectroscopy is effective, but the emission spectroscopy is still more effective. There is always a linear concentration reason. But of course, there are some limiting factors also. This enormous sensitivity implies the purity of analytes. That is, if there is even a very less amount of any kind of impure compound, that means it is going to affect our fluorescence. Also that only few molecules exhibit luminescence compared to that of UV visible or visible electromagnetic radiations. We can see that fluorescence is given out by very few molecules. The absorbance measurement includes the changing the transmittance from 100% to 99%. It is very hard to measure fluorescence in most of the molecules. Now, observing fluorescence is just like observing out of 100% of the molecule, only 1% of the molecules will be giving fluorescence phenomena. So, hence we can say that it's a very rare phenomena giving out fluorescence or phosphorescence. Next coming, we have already learned about how to calculate the multiplicities of a singlet and triplet state. But what are these singlet and triplet state based on? It is based on Pauli's exclusion principle, which is that no two electrons in an atom can have the same set of four quantum numbers. In other words, in the same orbital, we say that the electrons must have two opposite spins. That means they should be paired. So the net magnetic field will be diamagnetic. That means this will not have a magnetic movement. Molecule with the unpaired electrons, example they can be a triplet state, possesses some magnetic movement and they are attracted by a magnetic field. Diamagnetic systems do not get attracted by the magnetic field, whereas paramagnetic systems do get attracted by the systems. Now when we see a singlet state, it means it is paired. If we see a triplet state, that means it is an unpaired system. Let us see what happens. There is a ground state like this, and these are said to be a singlet state. These are said to be a triplet state. So this is an excited singlet state and an excited triplet state respectively. Excited triplet state is of less energy than an excited singlet state. Singlet to triplet transitions are far less probable than singlet-singlet transition. That means this is very difficult to observe. Now singlet-singlet transition can be seen easily because there is no change of the pair, and finally they will always remain paired systems only. Whereas from singlet to triplet, this is very less probable because there is complete change of the spin. And when this particular electron wants to return back to the ground state, there it is going to have some kind of repulsions from the previous electron present over there. If at all the electron wants to return back to the ground state, it has to again change its spin and then return back to the ground state. So this is how we say that triplet transitions are far less probable, and also the triplet state of energy is less having less energy than an excited singlet state. Obviously, when we say that there is a singlet state and a triplet state, there would be change in some physico-chemical properties also. This you would generally see when you do a photochemical reaction. There you can say that once there is a singlet state, there will be one set of reactions going on. If there are triplet states, then there will be different steps of reactions which will go on and which will give you different stereochemistries. Now let us understand what are electronic and vibrational levels. S0 can be said to be a ground state of a molecule at ambient temperature of all the molecules in solution. S1 and S2 can be said as excited singlet state. T1, let us consider that it's the lowest energetic triplet state, usually of less energy than the lowest energetic excited singlet state at S1. So what we have considered here, S0 is a ground state, S1 and S2 being excited singlet state, T1 being excited triplet state, but T1 is having less energy compared to that of your S1 also. Now each of these states features a various vibrational levels. This permits energetic similarity of the different electronic spin states of a molecule. Now let us observe this. There is a singlet state, there is a triplet state. Now what is this S1? It is an excited singlet state. Look at T1. It is an excited triplet state. But look at the energy level. The energy level of T1 is less than that of S1. Hence, going from an S1 to T1 is rather less probable, but when it happens so because the T1 state is having less energy than that of excited state of the singlet state also. Now because of this, singlet triplet transitions are very less probable than singlet transition, because for the triplet state we always see that there is a spin conversion that is necessary. Hence the average lifetime of an excited triplet state is 10 raised to minus second, and it is more, while as a singlet excited state the lifetime is 10 raised to minus 8 to 10 raised to minus 5 second. That is, more time is taken from T1 back to the ground state, whereas less time is taken from S1 back to the ground state. What are the various deactivation processes? An excited molecule can return to its ground state by the combination of several mechanistic steps. Now, two of these steps are fluorescence and phosphorescence. That means an electron has gone from a ground state to an excited state. There, they will have many other phenomena that will be going on. But two more significant systems that we might observe as an emission spectroscopy would be fluorescence and phosphorescence. But there would be different deactivation steps also, which are called as radiationless processes. Now, what are the different types of deactivation processes? The favored route to the ground state is always that minimizes the lifetime. That means lesser the lifetime of the excited state, easily it can return back to its ground state. So, if the deactivation process of the fluorescence is favorable, then fluorescence is observed. But if the deactivation procedure of a radiationless processes is favorable, then definitely radiationless processes happen. If at all fluorescence is to happen, that means its deactivation procedure should be more favorable than that of the radiationless procedure. Hence, in these conditions only we can observe emissions. If the radiationless pathways has more favorable conditions, then obviously fluorescence is either absent or it is completely less intensive. That is how we can say that photoluminescence phenomena is very limited to small number of systems incorporating structural and environmental features that cause that the rate of radiationless deactivation to be slowed in favor of emission of photons. So generally what is accepted is radiationless processes. Mostly what happens is most of the time the electrons they undergo radiationless processes because they will have a less time lapse coming back to the ground state. But if at all there should be an observation of a fluorescence or phosphorescence phenomena, then there should be some structural and environmental features associated with the atom, and then only we can observe the emission of photons and they can be recorded through fluorescence spectroscopy. Let us understand what is the theory behind these fluorescence and phosphorescence. Previously, we have seen that S0 is the ground state. S1 and S2 are the excited states of these particular ground state. T1 is a triplet excited state. Now let us say that some light is shined on a system. Now what we have given is a shorter wavelength and high energy. What happens is these electrons are now going from ground state, that is S0, to S1 and S2 respectively. There are various vibrational levels which are associated with both ground state and the excited state. This particular phenomena is called as absorption. Now, obviously, when they go to an excited state, they have to return to the ground state. Previously, firstly, what will happen is from an excited state, these energy systems shall return back to the lowest vibrational states of the excited state. This is called as vibrational relaxation. This happens due to collision between the molecules of the excited species and those of the solvent. Now we have already seen an example of acetophenone where there were collisions between the molecules and the loss of energy. If I have put that acetophenone molecule in some kind of solvent, there might be some collision between the molecule as well as there might be some collision between the solvent of the system. Then also it will lose its energy and return back to the vibrational state, lowest energy of the vibrational state of the excited state system. Will it remain at S2? No, it will definitely come back to S1. That is an S1 excited state. Now this particular system is called as internal conversions. When two levels are sufficiently closed energetically. Now can we not observe that S1 and S2 are closely related? We can say that there would be a system where the S2 energy level photons will return back to S1. Now this is because the two levels are very much energetically similar. What will happen when they return back to S1? these photons have to return back to the lowest vibrational energy of the S1 system also. Now these electrons, they cannot just stay in any of the vibrational state, rather they would return back to the lowest vibrational level of the excited state. Then they will come back to the ground state system. Now if there is a low energy and a longer wavelength and we observe some kind of emission, this is called as fluorescence. Now can we not observe that fluorescence is being observed from lowest vibrational level of an excited electronic state back to the ground state. This is always mandatory that the fluorescence has to happen from the lowest vibrational state back to the ground state. It cannot be from any of the vibrational state. It has to be from the lowest vibrational level of an excited electronic state back to the ground state. Now if this phenomena doesn't happen, then what will happen? There is a phenomena called as inter-system crossing. Now S1 and S2 that we are observing is because of the singlet state. Whereas when there is an inter-system crossing, there is a spin reversal. If there is a reversal of spin, then which is commonly seen in systems which are having heavy atoms, there are certain paramagnetic species which are present, example oxygen in the solution. Then instead of fluorescence, these kind of photons, they shall come back to a triplet state. Now these electrons that are present over there, rather than being in a singlet state, they would turn themselves into a triplet state. This particular phenomena is generally called as reversal of spin. From there, how does this happen is because if there is a presence of any heavy atom in the system like oxygen, then there is a reversal of phenomena turning the singlet state into its triplet state. Now look at the energy states of S1 and T1. T1 is having more or less energy compared to that of S1 system also, and hence the spin inversion may happen. If T1 had a more energy level than that of S1, then this would never ever happen. So intersystem crossing is a phenomena where there is a reversal of spin. From this reversal of spin, later when the electrons they return back to the ground state, this particular phenomena is called as phosphorescence. So from an S1 singlet excited state back to the ground state, it is called as fluorescence. From a reversal of spin through an intersystem crossing, if it returns back to the ground state, then it is called as phosphorescence phenomena. Now, photon absorption rate would be in the range of 10 raised to minus 14 to 10 raised to minus 15. Fluorescence emission rate is directly related to molar absorptivity. Where have we come across molar absorptivity? In terms of Beer-Lambert's law. Lifetime of the excited state is 10 raised to minus 7 to 10 raised to minus second. That means they are generally weakly absorbing system. The lifetime of fluorescence is generally between 10 raised to minus 6 to 10 raised to minus 5 second. But there would be other systems called as external conversion also. That is, it involves the energy transfer between the excited molecule and the solvent or the solutes. This is called as collisional quenching. That means if there are two excited molecules and these excited molecules they hit upon the solvent molecules, this is called as collisional quenching. Now there might be dissociation or pre-dissociation. For example, if I give you iodobenzene, the iodine might dissociate or it might undergo pre-dissociation system also. Such kind of systems again they will not undergo any kind of fluorescence or phosphorescence system. Now, when I say an external conversion, it involves quenching. That means there will be no further fluorescence and phosphorescence because either the solvent molecules take up the energy or the solute molecules which are not excited, they might take up the energy and hence the phenomena of fluorescence and phosphorescence does not happen. Now, what is a vibrational relaxation? Upon excitation, we can see different vibrational levels that can be achieved. Now, it can be V1, V2, V3, so on and so forth. In the solution and in any excess vibrational energy is lost, because of the collision between the molecules of excited species and solvent molecules. This might definitely happen. When the molecules are gone to the excited state, there might be some collisions and they might result that the fluorescence phenomena may not happen. The result of this would be energy is transferred to the solvent and minuscule warming. Then the lifetime is again completely affected because of the vibrationally excited species. Now again the lifetime goes back to 10 raised to minus 12 seconds, which is very very less. So what is the consequence of all this? Fluorescence and phosphorescence of an analyte solution always occurs due to electron transition from the vibrational ground state. This might not happen only. Why does the fluorescence happen? It is due to any chosen electron transition from any vibrational ground state produces less energy than the previous excitation and absorb. Fluorescent signals of a molecule moiety generally appears at a longer wavelength than the corresponding absorbance signals. This is called as Stokes shift. This you may have learnt in your Raman spectroscopy. That is, if there is an absorption of almost 400 nanometer and there is an emission of 450 nanometers, that means whatever has been absorbed, when it is released out, if it is of a higher wavelength, that means this phenomena is called as fluorescence. Obviously, the energy is more when there is a shorter wavelength. The energy coming out when the wavelength is longer, the energy is very, very less. Now, this phenomena occurs through a Stokes shift, which you have already observed in your Raman spectroscopy. Now, there is also a second observation upon this. Upon luminescence, different vibrational levels can be achieved in a solution. In any excess vibrational energy is lost, where there might be some excited species and some excited solvent molecules also. The consequence of all of this system, that is the excited species and an excited solvent molecules, it happens so that fluorescence and phosphorescence, they are never a sharp band. Have you not observed that your UV visible spectra is also a not sharp band, whereas your IR spectra is also not a sharp band? But the moment you move to NMR and mass spectra, those are sharp bands. And in the same way, because we are making use of UV visible light only in the emission spectra, we will be getting bands, but we will be not getting sharp signals in the fluorescence and phosphorescence spectra. Now, because of this, there is a second consequence also. The fluorescence spectra of an analyte more often is more or less similar to its absorption spectra. So look at the figure over here. That is, the way the absorption spectrum is looking, exactly opposite the emission spectrum is also looking. That is, if it is going from sigma to sigma star, lambda to lambda star, pi to pi star system, the same opposite way it is returning back from sigma star to sigma or pi star to pi. This is how they can be said to be replicas of each other in a way that absorption spectra is almost similar to that of its emission spectra. Now this is based on what? It is based on a Frank-Cordon principle. Electronic transitions are so fast that each atom has nearly the same position before and after transition. This is due to small mass of the electrons. We can say that the mass of the electron is very very less. When we calculate the mass of the electrons, they are said to be from 0 point something, so many zeros associated with it. That means because of this small mass, whatever is changes is happening, it cannot be easily detected. Thus, the molecular geometry initially is kept at higher vibrational levels and are achieved upon absorption. Upon relaxation to the ground state, the same happens. Molecular geometry is initially kept, so the vibrational level that is reached first is not the ground state. So what happens here? Let us take an example. Now can we not see there is a formaldehyde species? Now look at its S0 state, that is the ground state. Now 110 picometer and there is a 116.5 degrees 120 picometer that has been between the angle and the bond length. Now once this species has been shined with some light, once it goes to an S1 excited state, look at the observation. There is just a change from 110 to 109 picometer. Can it be observed? It's a very very small change. Look at the angle also. The angle is also having very less change. So this very less change cannot be actually observed, because what was the position in the previous position will be the same position at the end also. So energy absorbed would be exactly like an energy emitted. Now S0 S0 geometry and solvation, and S1 S0 geometry and solvation. S1 S1 geometry and solvation, S0 with S1 geometry and solvation are almost similar. I cannot say that it is same, but they are almost similar. When this similarity is very near, then the chances of observing fluorescence and phosphorescence is very less. So we cannot actually record the emission spectra very properly in such a phenomena. When can we actually absorb, when can we actually see the emission spectrum? Where there is a significant change in this solvation and the geometry. Now look at the absorption and excitation spectra of this particular compound. Now look at the absorption spectra, that is 10 raised to minus 6 m, 10 raised to minus 11 m. Now absorption and fluorescence are exactly similar to each other because they are from the same molecule. Whatever has been absorbed will be giving out. That means if we overlap the emission spectra and the absorption spectra, they will overlap completely. This is because of the changes which are very less. Hence we say that fluorescence spectroscopy and phosphorescence spectroscopy are very rare phenomena. Emission spectra are measured by holding the excitation radiation fixed at one particular wavelength and scanning through the emitted radiation. So what we do, we hold the radiation, excitation radiation, say at 400 nanometer only. That means we do not give a range, we would just hold it at 400 nanometer. And then when this is held at a particular wavelength, and then it is scanned through an emitted radiation. Now look at the previous system. When we have held it in the range of almost 400, 300, 400, 500, that means these are the ranges where they have held the excitation radiation. Finally they have observed what, between 500, 600 to 700, that means a longer wavelength is observed. So emission intensity versus emission wavelength is being taken. What they have done is, earlier they have held the excitation radiation at 400, 300, 400 and 500, but what they have got at the end is 500, 600 and 700. That means they have got a longer wavelength and a lesser energy. But for previous they have given a shorter wavelength and there is a more energy given to the system. So excitation spectra is measured by varying excitation wavelength and measuring the emitted light at one particular wavelength. That is what I explained. That means something is held at one particular wavelength and something has been observed. Because the first step is generating fluorescence is absorption of the radiation to create an excited state. An excitation spectrum is essentially identical to an absorption spectrum taken under the same condition. That means the conditions will always remain same. We shall not change the temperature, we shall not change the solvent, but what we are not even going to change is the excitation radiation. That means we are also going to hold the excitation radiation between 300, 400 and 500. But once it comes emitted out as a longer wavelength, then we say that yes, there is an emission spectroscopy and there is a chance that we are going to get a fluorescence spectroscopy. Now, what was a phosphorescence phenomena? We have already seen that for a phosphorescence phenomena, there should be an intersystem crossing. That is, from going from a singlet state to a triplet state. Now, this deactivation can also occur by internal or external conversion or by phosphorescence. Generally, what happens is there would be a system where there is more stability that will happen. It may be a phosphorescence phenomena or it may be internal or external conversions. Now, since triplet to singlet conversions are comparatively improbable, that means they might not happen only. The average lifetime of an excited triplet state is 10 raised to minus 4 to 10 seconds and more. Thus, the emission of such transition may persist for some time after irradiation has been discontinued. That means once the light source is removed, still there is some light is which is being emitted. This happens, and from the triplet state, then the electrons will come back to the ground state. The other deactivation transition competes strongly with phosphorescence also. So this phenomena is usually very low at very low temperature in a highly viscous media or the molecules being absorbed on surfaces. Now what happens is there might be a fight between internal external conversion also. If there is an internal and external conversions, then there is no chance of getting a phosphorescence. Now if at all this has been overcome, then there is a reversal of spin, that is there is some intersystem crossing, from then the triplet state is converted back to the ground state again after the reversal of spin back to the ground state. Now if this happens, this will take more time and hence the time lapse of phosphorescence is more. Now, what is the shape of a luminescence spectra? Fluorescence and phosphorescence, they are called as emission spectrum. The spectrums both come at a longer wavelength compared to that of absorption spectra of the same molecule. Now, this particular phenomena is called as Stokes shift. Now, observe that we have taken something like a fluorescence phenomena at 500 to 550 nanometer. Phosphorescence phenomena at minus 78 degrees. That means lower the temperature, phosphorescence phenomena is observed. At room temperature, it is generally the fluorescence phenomena. But look at the wavelength difference also. Fluorescence phenomena is at a lower wavelength and phosphorescence phenomena is a still longer wavelength phenomena. That is, fluorescence, if it is at 500, we are observing phosphorescence phenomena at the range of 550 to 600. Fluorescence phenomena is between 500 to 550. Now, fluorescence emission spectrum of a molecule is more or less similar to its absorption spectrum. That means, yes, it looks similar to that of the absorption spectrum. The lambda max of fluorescence spectrum is slightly shifted to a longer wavelength compared to the lambda max of absorption spectrum. Now, we have already previously seen which is a Frank-Codon principle. That is, if something is being held tight, that is at a 400 nanometer, and I am observing something at 450 nanometer, that means I am able to observe a longer wavelength and there is a emission spectroscopy. So what generally do we make use of this particular system? Now light is shined upon a solution. There will be certain molecules which will go from the ground state to an excited state, and later there will be some fluorescence intensity and some kind of energy, and the wavelength is being emitted or transmitted out, and this particular intensity has been recorded. Now this is a particular phenomena where we observe fluorescence or phosphorescence. Thank you.